All right, so welcome to the Harmful Algal Bloom webinar series. My name is Amy Weckel, and I'm from the Illinois Water Resources Center at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I'll be your moderator today. We can forward this talk. 1 second. Oops, okay. This webinar is hosted by the Algal Bloom Action Team, of which the Illinois Water Resources Center is a member. The Algal Bloom Action Team is a collaboration of water professionals, researchers, and educators from the 12 states in the North Central region of the United States. Team members include the National Network of Water Resources Research Institutes, the North Central Region Water Network, and university extensions within each state in the North Central region. In addition to this webinar, our team hosts a website of resources, including fact sheets and frequently asked questions of HABS topics. I encourage you to visit our website, which is hosted at the North Central Region Water Network currently. But please note that that site is under construction at the moment and will be transitioning to a new site in the new year. But for now, there's also other resources you can explore, including fact sheets on what you should know about HABs and their health-related effects on animals, prevention and treatment for landowners, and a HABs frequently asked questions database. There's also a link to the recordings from previous webinars, as well as our virtual HABs research symposiums, which are held annually in January. And speaking of the symposium, let's see if we can get this to, there we go. We have another one coming up from January 8th to 9th. And the registration for that will be opening soon. Hopefully, I will be through the campus red tape by the end of the week in order to get that registration site launched. This year, we're going to be charging a $25 per participant fee for registration, something we haven't done in the past, but to date, everybody's efforts on the team have been voluntary, and we need a little bit of funding to support the platform itself and the efforts of the Algal Bloom Action Team in general, to continue the efforts of the annual symposium and the bi-monthly webinars. So we appreciate everyone's understanding around this need. And so with that, let's get into today's presentation. If you have questions or technical issues, you can contact me or through the chat or through the Q&A panel. Our speaker today is Dr. Paul Hanson. Paul is a distinguished research professor and ecosystems ecologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Center for Limnology. His work examines the impact of climate change, land use, and human activities on quality of lakes and freshwater systems. He's known for leading interdisciplinary teams and international collaborations, often working at the intersection of ecology, computer science, and engineering. He directs the Environmental Data Initiative, a national effort to make environmental data more accessible, reusable, and impactful. He also co-founded the Global Lake Ecological Observatory Network Fellows Program, which trains graduate students in team science and big data approaches for studying lakes. His recent research in collaboration with computer scientists combines machine learning with ecological knowledge to improve predictions of water quality and applies AI methods to improve metadata and annotation for EDI. And with that, I will stop sharing, and Paul, you can take it away.
Great. Can you see it, Amy?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Thanks, Amy, for the introduction. And also thanks for the opportunity to come and talk with you about a topic that I've been working on for about the last 10 years and really has engaged me intellectually, captured a lot of my energy, and it's just created a lot of opportunities for me. The title, Advances in Water Quality Modeling Through Knowledge-Guided Machine Learning, really has two important components to it. It's the water quality modeling, and I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that soon. And then this relatively new idea of knowledge-guided machine learning, By the way, I'll say up front, it goes by a lot of different names. But the important part is that it's the combination of AI techniques, that's the machine learning, with expertise from the science domain, and that's the knowledge guided part. So you might hear physics guided deep learning, for example, are different examples of the same thing. We have a pretty long authors list here today. I wanted to make sure I acknowledged the broad team who's responsible for kind of the diversity of information I'm going to show you here today. It includes both computer scientists as well as ecologists. And it's truly been a team effort, sort of like the name Knowledge Guided Machine Learning, or KGML, suggests. You can't really do the science of KGML without having the two disciplines, or sometimes even more, the ecology along with the computer science, machine learning in this case. Let's go ahead and dive in. There we go. Okay, just a couple of quick comments in addition to what Amy gave for the introduction. I just thought I'd give a little bit of background on where I'm coming from in my career, because I think it gives a little bit of context for why I'd even kind of launched down this path in the first place. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin in Whitewater, my master's there as well, and worked on human physiology, first on applying physiological concepts to horses, but then applying those to people. At the time, which was back around 1990, it was actually easier to work on people than it was on horses. Um, and as part of that work, I had to do software development and computer hardware development to connect ventilation equipment used on people to computers so that I could capture the data and model the output from it. So that kind of gave me a unique background of biology, chemistry, and some applied software engineering as well as hardware engineering. I took those skills to Abbott Labs in North Chicago, and then to the Boeing Company in Seattle, Washington, working at the um, physiology department at the Boeing Company for a little bit. Uh, John Magnuson, who is the department chair of where I currently am at the Center for Limnology, happened to be on sabbatical at the University of Washington. He and I met. He brought me back to computerize the Center for Limnology, which I did. I went on to do my PhD here once I understood you could think of lakes as systems, and I could apply my software engineering skills and my systems thinking to lakes. I went straight to sensors, sensor networks, software programming, model development, big data issues, working on carbon cycling and water quality. I also want to call out two organizations that have already been mentioned once, but GLEON, the Global Lake Ecological Observatory Network. That is a network of about 1,000 scientists from around the world, all interested in working on lakes. It's also interdisciplinary and collaborative. And so I kind of grew up a lot of my team science and collaboration skills with that within the context of GLEON. And then also the Environmental Data Institute. EDI is funded by the National Science Foundation to be a data repository for the environmental sciences. And it's grown to be a lot more than that. It works within sort of the science workflows of a number of organizations. Even though it started within the long-term ecological research program, it's grown quite a bit since then. I bring it up here because data are required for data-driven science, and specifically AI in this case. And EDI is doing the best that it can to help support environmental sciences in their AI efforts. So if you're interested in big data and how to use your big data and manage and store and publish and share your big data, be sure to let me know. I'm going to open the actual sciencey part of this talking about water quality modeling, and I'm going to use a recent example. This is one on Lake Mendota where we're interested in understanding what would it take to take Lake Mendota from where it is today. That's the bottom photo showing that bloom, which almost certainly is, whoops, a harmful algal bloom, and revert it back to its conditions of mesotrophy, if not oligotrophy. And can we do that using data from our long-term ecological research program and a model designed specifically for this purpose, a model around lake metabolism in this case. And so this is just an example of a water quality model. And here, when we talk about water quality, we're talking really about phosphorus concentration, water clarity, organic carbon, both dissolved and particulate in the water column, and the particulate representing phytoplankton in this case, and dissolved oxygen through the water column, with hypolimnetic anoxia being, a real problem in eutrophic lakes, of course. Um, and the phosphorus cycling and metabolism are key parts of this model. I don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but I just want to point out that in this box and arrow diagram, where the boxes represent the states of the system, like dissolved organic carbon, dissolved oxygen, particulate organic carbon, and phosphorus, those cycle or elements and nutrients cycle through these boxes based on the processes of respiration and primary production, but there's also entrainment and settling and interaction with the sediments and a whole suite of processes that are happening in the hypolimnion. Anybody who does modeling for water quality, whether it's for these issues or for phytoplankton blooms that uses hydrodynamic water quality models, will be familiar with this. This particular model doesn't have phytoplankton communities. I'll mention something about that in a minute. So it's a relatively simple model, but it's an easy way to illustrate just the concept of process-based models. We fit the model to 20 years of data from our LTR site. I just plot the model predictions with the observations being in red, showing just two of the many variables that we predict: water temperature and dissolved oxygen. I highlight those because they're going to come up over and over again in the examples that I show. They're kind of the first two variables that we go after in water quality modeling, because if we can get these kind of basic foundational variables about right, that makes getting at other aspects of chemistry and biology a little bit easier. And so it does a pretty good job in predicting those variables, but we've learned some things, and these are common lessons. Sort of regardless of the particular model that you choose. It's not bad for a model that's intended for one lake over decades. Certainly the physics is much easier to model than the chemistry, which is much easier to model than the biology. We're in a one-dimensional model here as opposed to, for example, a 2D or a 3D model. So it's probably a bit easier. It does miss the short-term dynamics. This particular model wasn't designed to get the hourly variation in the data, for example, and it misses extreme events. You can see all kinds of extreme events in water clarity indicated by Secchi depth and dissolved oxygen, especially in the epilimnion. This is a common problem with water quality simulation, especially for phytoplankton and I'm sure for harmful algal blooms. These are rare events that create fat tails in the distributions and by their nature are difficult to predict. But it's still useful, and in this case, it's for scenarios. I'm going to show this just to sort of close out this example. It's not particularly germane to knowledge-guided machine learning, but I just want to show you what we use this water quality model for. We turn off the phosphorus in a scenario here and try to determine how long would it take if we could somehow keep everything going in Lake Mendota and yet stop the phosphorus input to the system. And we're just going to look at a few of the different variables here. So we'll look at epilimnetic phosphorus. And we see that once we turn off the input, we have this rapid decrease in phosphorus due to flushing, but then a long, slow decrease in phosphorus that occurs because of recycling of phosphorus from the sediments. This is a problem for eutrophied lakes in a general sense too, which is there's this legacy of phosphorus that's built up in the sediment that makes it difficult to improve the long-term quality of the water quality of the system. If we look at Secchi depth next, there is a slight increase immediately, but then this sort of long gradual increase, and we don't pass from a eutrophic state to a mesotrophic state for 85 years. That's what this vertical red line is. And then there's a sudden improvement that gets us past the threshold at about 85 years. There we go. The next variable is anoxic days. So these are the number of days that the hypolimnion in this lake is anoxic. And of course, we want zero anoxic days so that the deep, colder water of the lake can support cold water fisheries, which historically it used to do, but in past decades, that fishery has essentially been eliminated because of hypolimnetic anoxia. So this is the slowest variable to recover, and it takes nearly 100 years for uh, anoxia to disappear from the hypolimnion in the lake, just because there's a legacy of phosphorus and a legacy of organic carbon that's built up that takes a lot longer to flush out of the system or mineralize in the case of the organic carbon than some of the other constituents. And so we've learned some lessons here. The recovery times, they vary between the different indicators of water quality, and there's some dependencies. The sequence is apolymnetic phosphorus goes first, then water chlorine, and then anoxia. And so we've identified two important ecological concepts through this work, ecosystem legacies and ecosystem memories. So the legacy is 150 years of excess phosphorus loading in the catchment or phosphorus use in the catchment that's led to high loading in the lake and a buildup of phosphorus in the sediments. And the memory indicates that past water quality states actually control the current organic carbon and oxygen dynamics in the system. Okay, so we do a lot of this kind of modeling. We've used lots of different models and built different models for these sorts of purposes. And what we've learned over the years is there are a lot of challenges with hydrodynamic water quality simulations. For one, it takes a graduate student about a year to learn and calibrate for just one lake. The phytoplankton community dynamics are extremely difficult. I had a postdoc working with me about a little over 10 years ago, and our only attempt with this particular hydrodynamic water quality model called diresum cadum, which then became GLM AED, was to reproduce the distribution of cyanobacteria biomass in the system and green algae and brown algae as well, diatoms. And what we found is we just simply couldn't even reproduce the long fat tail of the distribution. In other words, those bloom events, no matter what we did with parameterization of the model. I happened to go to a National Science Foundation meeting on modeling, and there were some atmospheric scientists there. And I knew that at the time they were having challenges reproducing storm events, for example, in atmospheric models, weather models. And I asked them about this problem. They're like, yeah, we've got the same problem in generating weather predictions. And so at the time, we're trying two different approaches. One was just finer spatial scales and hoping that those kind of dynamics and features would emerge from the data. And the other is just build that fat tail distribution into the actual model. And those became what are known as stochastic weather generators. So they actually sample the distribution. So this is a known and common problem, not just in water quality modeling, but in a lot of different sciences. It's also the case that calibrations do not generalize well. So if we calibrate the model for one lake in one period of time, it often doesn't work for a different lake or the same lake in a different period of time. We already talked about extreme events. The input requirements tend to be pretty rigid, so you've got to have the correct data to drive these models. It can take a long time to run these models and calibrate them, and therefore they don't scale well to hundreds or thousands of lakes. And what that means is we end up with a hammer situation where we invest a ton of time into this kind of technology. And because we have infrastructure and expertise and time invested, we want to apply it to every problem. And that's just not a good situation for being adaptive for the kinds of science needs that we may have. So we recognize these problems. And I happened to be at a meeting again in Washington and working with computer science colleagues, and it was about the time that Google came out with Google Translate. And we had just happened to publish a paper that was related conceptually to what they do in Google Translate. We had converted lake water quality time series into natural language, into symbolic representation, essentially, and then used natural language processing to analyze those data. And we thought, okay, that's pretty interesting. And what Google came out with may have some direct application. And so I asked a computer science colleague in Washington if they knew somebody, and they said, yes, you have to look up Vipin Kumar at the University of Minnesota and talk with him. He's practically in your backyard from Madison. And so I sent him an email, a really long 2-page email saying, we've got a really important issue here, which is modeling water quality and carbon cycling and lakes and reservoirs across the US. And we have two ideas. First, a well-trained limnologist doesn't need to know a lot about these lakes to be able to make good predictions. So, we know that this is possible given all the history and training and information and literature that a limnologist has as part of their training. And then we also noticed too that Google Translate just came out, and big data sets with relatively simple models provide new opportunities. Well, to my surprise, Vipin got right back to us and said, thanks a lot for contacting us. And the problem we pose is one very similar to what they're already working on. They've been developing machine learning techniques for monitoring surface dynamics of water bodies around the world. In this case, looking at surface elevation and surface area, not the water quality of lakes. But the task at hand attempts to combine the power of big data techniques with knowledge used by limnologists in our case. And this technique is being pursued in a lot of disciplines. And they had just published a paper on it called Theory Guided Data Science, also known as Knowledge Guided Machine Learning. This led to a broad collaboration, which is represented by the people who are on this slide here, computer scientists on the left and us limnologists on the right. And it's actually a much bigger collaboration than what you see here, but I've included some of the players that show up in the examples I'm going to show here today. Vipin Kumar runs the group out of the University of Minnesota, and his graduate students have moved on, become faculty members elsewhere. And Runlong Yu, for example, was a student of Zhao Jia and has become faculty at University of Alabama. And the folks on the right-hand side have moved up through the ranks as well, many of whom are now in professional positions or faculty members. This group also, or at least some members of the group, were funded by the National Science Foundation in the Macrosystems Biology program back when it existed to explore KGML to ultimately get over to the right here, which is understanding and predicting water quality at the scale of the US, starting with what's on the left here. Really well-studied lakes where we have lots of data, fusing our machine learning and ecosystem processes to create knowledge-guided machine learning that can then scale up to regions. So that's sort of the long-term goal of what this project is up to. And I'm going to talk about a few examples of what we're doing along the way here. By the way, it's important to note that we, of course, are trying, as are a lot of people, just straight up machine learning approaches to predicting water quality. This is an example on Lake Mendota as well, where the model was trained on years of data. And again, we're showing dissolved oxygen and temperature with dissolved oxygen on the left, temperature on the right. Uh, uh, Training data are shown on the top. The validation split is shown in the middle, and then the test is shown on the bottom. So the test data were not included in training and validation. And so when you look down at dissolved oxygen here in 2022 and 2023, the model gets it, about right at the seasonal scale, but it's clearly missing a lot of the short-term variation in the data. And a similar story is true for temperature. And so, the machine learning model does pretty well, but it has a number of issues that are somewhat complementary to the process-based model. Out of sample easily fails. While this was trained on Lake Mendota, if we applied it to a different lake, I'm sure we'd have some problems with it. Requires a lot of data, and straight up machine learning typically requires regularized, well-formatted data that fill out a matrix. Often machine learning, because it's a black box, it doesn't care about the physics, will actually violate physics and ecological principles. And because it depends completely on the data, and if the data don't include fat tails, which by definition are sort of rare in the data set, it's going to fail at predicting things like harmful algal blooms. And of course, interpreting the black box is a major challenge. So why most science domains underutilize deep learning techniques? By the way, I'm going to use machine learning, deep learning, and AI interchangeably here. There may be, some differences between those depending upon the context, but for now, let's just use them interchangeably. The scientific problems are under constraint in nature. In other words, we don't have enough data. The variables show complex and non-stationary patterns and poor generalizability out of sample. And the basic nature of scientific discovery really demands that we understand the way the world works and create actionable results. Um, and be able to update our conceptual models of the system. In other words, we need to be able to understand mechanisms. So when we went to visit Vipin Kumar, we were exposed to this idea of knowledge-guided machine learning. We can think of approaches to science as falling along two different axes. The use of data on the bottom, data science models, and these could be anywhere from regression to deep learning models that are only data-driven. And another axis being use of scientific models with this the high end of the scale being hydrodynamic water qualities that could be multidimensional. And so theory-guided data science seeks to get to both the best worlds by combining those approaches to get accurate predictions, mechanistic understanding, but also to discover relationships and have generalizability. KGML has been in operation for about a decade now and is growing like wildfire in multiple disciplines. What separates it from straight up machine learning, of course, is the explicit inclusion of knowledge within the modeling framework. You could argue that all machine learning is guided by knowledge, and that's true, but usually it's sort of the implicit inclusion of knowledge in it. What you would see here in this collection of activities and outcomes is really just a broad application of KGML, and it goes by many different names as you see here, but used everything from physics to chemistry to ecosystems ecology, epidemiology, protein folding, lots of different areas in which it's being applied. The question often comes up of what do we really mean when we talk about knowledge inclusion in the modeling framework? And this slide is meant to describe it. It comes out of Anuj Karpatny's 2024 paper, which is referenced down here in the bottom. And these different sort of categories of ways of thinking about knowledge have different ways you can implement them. And so the format used for the representation is one. It could be partial differential equations, knowledge graphs, all the way up to mechanistic models. And the examples we'll see here today, indicated by the stars, are indicated on each one of these slide bars. So mechanistic models. Is the knowledge perfect? In other words, are they known inviolable physical laws, for example, or is it imperfect? And we tend to be over here where we're dealing often with ecological principles and complex systems, where even though we may know particular biogeochemical processes and physical dynamics, the way those are expressed in emergent properties of a system aren't always directly tied to those physical principles, at least in clear, traceable ways. What is the form of the knowledge? Is it process centric? Is it hybridized modeling? Is it machine learning centric? We're going to sort of cross this gradient a little bit. And what's the method? Is it put into the loss functions? In other words, are we demanding that physical principles and ecological principles be met? Is it kind of built into the architecture? Is it part of how we represent the data and do representation learning? So all three of these are going to be in the examples. And then are we doing forward modeling? Are we trying to do inversion and understand the inputs and parameterization of the model. There are a lot of different ways um, we can use the models. And generative models, of course, is the latest and hottest topic. And it'll be the last example that I show here. Okay, so eco-KGML is really just ecological application of knowledge-guided machine learning. In the middle is a representation, supposedly, of the real system. And we can represent that either by our knowledge or by data. And ideally, we want to fuse those two so that we can better understand the complexity of the system. We have a number of different aims here. We want to leverage the ecological knowledge while improving the predictions, and we want to incorporate multiple scales of variability from the data, essentially all the information that the data have to offer. We want to be able to transfer what we learn from multiple systems to other systems so that we have good generalizability. And of course, we want to feed back to our understanding of ecosystems. I'm going to start here with a kind of general example and a simple example of a KGML application. We can think of a generic process-based model as having the model in the middle here, which has a set of equations and system states that an equation parameters that go along with it. There are a set of input drivers. In the case of a lake, it might be meteorological data, inflow data, nutrient loads. And then there are responses that come out. These are probably predictions of the ecosystem state, like water temperature, dissolved oxygen, phytoplankton biomass, chlorophyll dynamics, those sorts of things. And the idea is that essentially the process-based models transfers the information and patterns that are the inputs into the outputs. In a simple representation of KGML, we have both machine learning and process-based models that are in the middle. We also might have process-based models as part of the input to the system. So we could take all the input drivers, generate model predictions that in turn inform machine learning models. And the output of this whole system could inform additional machine learning models for better clarification. And so in this example I'm about to show you, we're talking about pre-training simulation, pre-training the KGML on simulated lake data. It's one of the many approaches. So simulation data from different lakes can be used to pre-train the machine learning model. And so our knowledge, which is instantiated in the model simulation, generates information that's used by machine learning to make better predictions too and help constrain the predictions. You can think of it this way. The knowledge-guided pre-training essentially um, puts the predictions much closer to the global minimum. And it puts them in a space that the data alone may not have gotten the training process to. And so simulation data go into a pre-trained neural network, then the observed data are used to fine-tune the model. In this paper by Jordan Reed, in which this approach was used, he ran an elegant but very simple experiment that ask the question, what if you have no data or modest amounts of data and lots of data? How do three different modeling approaches work? Machine learning only, process-based model only, or those combined into KGML? And so I'm going to show those three different models, process-based model, deep learning, PGML, which is also known as KGML, deep learning and process-based only. And across the x-axis is training temperature profiles. So the number of temperature profiles that went into training these models, it's a physical model for lake water temperature. And then the goodness of fit as indicated by test RMSE. And it's a reversed axis, so higher is a better fit. It's no surprise that when you have no data, deep learning alone can't even be used because it's a data-driven approach. Process-based models with no data, with some assumptions built in based on our expertise, actually do okay. But you only have to add a few data points before KGML actually improves the process-based model. As we keep adding data, the process-based model gets better, but it kind of levels off here at about 1.7 RMSE. Deep learning, on the other hand, just gets better and better and better as you add more data. KGML just stays on top until you get to a point where there's enough data that the data represent not only what you know about the system, but all of the variability that we could measure, at least given the scope of the project. So with tons of data, these two tend to converge. They also ran a similar sort of experiment where they left out key times of year from the training process to see whether or not process-based model, deep learning, and KGML could recreate those. And KGML outperformed the other two there as well. The second example is going to come from Falling Creek Reservoir in Virginia. And this is a study site run by colleague Dr. Kaylin Carey at Virginia Tech with a couple of her, at least at the time, graduate students who've gone on to um, different parts of their career since then. And in this case, uh, we're using this idea that it takes a number of different lakes and the information in those lakes to better inform a target lake that we're interested in studying. And so our target lake here is Falling Creek Reservoir, and we're trying to improve the prediction of chlorophyll in a forecast that goes from 1 to 7 days into the future. And the approach here is to take simulations from lakes that are not Falling Creek Reservoir. Whoops, sorry, simulations from lakes that include Falling Creek Reservoir, but don't include observational data from Falling Creek Reservoir. Pre-train the model and then fine-tune it with the actual observational data from Falling Creek Reservoir. By the way, what we found is that if we train from scratch only from the data from Falling Creek Reservoir, poor performance, but if we combine these two approaches, we get better performance. And this is a comparison of the different modeling approaches. In this case, again, it's RMSE. A better model is on the bottom. The lower the number, the better it is. So machine learning only on data alone did the poorest, and machine learning LSTM pre-trained on simulation data and then fine-tuned on Falling Creek Reservoir observation data did better. As an interesting side note, what we also learned too, though not shown here, is that there are a lot of situations in which training done on other lakes actually does a better job of prediction on a target lake than training only on the target lake data alone. In other words, the information contained in other lakes and the dynamics experienced by other lakes provide a diversity of interactions that are relevant to the target that we're looking at. And we'll be expanding on those ideas in future work. This is known as transfer learning. So what you learn from one ecosystem or a suite of ecosystems, that knowledge or what's been learned in the modeling environment can be transferred to others. Here's example 3. It's a physics-guided foundation model for scientific discovery done by Runlong Yu. And in this case, he has a more complicated model that starts to enter into the realm of what we call foundation models. And by foundation models, typically what we mean is we're throwing the kitchen sink at the model. Lots of different sources of data from different time periods under different conditions. And many different systems as well. So the model should be generalizable across large and diverse regions. It should be able to perform multiple prediction tasks, so not a single variable, but multiple variables well. In this case, he used data from 117 lakes that were gathered by other folks. And I highlight this one because he used a unique evolutionary approach to modeling the lakes. He divided the lakes into groups of lakes that had some similarities, and then machine learning models evolved through time using a genetic algorithm. And what's interesting about the genetic algorithm, which includes the stochastic component to it in the parameterization for the mutation of that model, is that it occasionally swaps information between models, so between groups of lakes, to see if what was learned from one group might be applicable to another group. And if that helps improve performance, those genes or those learned features are then incorporated into the model of a different system. That allows the different groups of lakes to learn from each other, but it also allows the actual model itself to mutate through time, so to adjust to dynamic systems. It's also based on physics in that it has constraints for energy and mass balance. Energy can to control temperature in the system and mass balance for dissolved oxygen over the system. Now, these are very complicated graphs, and I'm just going to point out a few things here. These are um, test lakes, so the models haven't seen these data before over a 1 year period. And the top is LSTM, so this is machine learning only, along with process-based model and the observed data. And the bottom ones are physics-based simulations. So the KGML version, along with observation and process-based only. So in the top, what we see is that LSTM, which is long short-term memory, a deep learning model, a recurrent neural network type of model that's good at time series data. The LSTM model doesn't perform particularly well on the observed data. The physics-based model, the process-based model, does pretty well at the surface. It sort of degrades in performance as you get down deeper. When we look at the bottom panel, the PGFM, which is the solid line here, by the way, the different colors just indicate the different depths, performs really well on the data at all different depths for temperature. A similar story is true for dissolved oxygen over here on the right. We see that, uh, let's just go for the sake of time directly to the bottom panel, the physics guided foundation model, which is the solid line, pretty much nails the data with a few exceptions here compared to the process-based model. So if we summarize those in performance metrics with physics guided on the very top, a number of different types and iterations of model in the middle, but then our KGML down on the bottom, the KGML just outperforms under all the different conditions. No surprise. The fourth example is modular compositional learning. And I'm just going to zip through this really quickly. This approach here takes a look at an overall problem, both in hydrodynamics and water quality, which is we tend to have a group of processes that we're modeling in a process-based model. Here we have five: heat, ice, diffusion, um, diffusive transport and convective transport in the system. And we know some of these processes very well, and we want to swap out a particular process with a machine learning component to see if we can do better than we can with the process-based model. And so that's why it's called modular compositional learning. Each one of these modules makes up the composition of the entire project, and we can swap out um, process-based models with machine learning. I want to go straight to the results here, where the MCL KGML does the best here, for sure, especially compared to process-based only, which is this more yellow line, and some of the other approaches. Our next step here, which we haven't finished yet, is being carried out by Bennett McAfee, where we essentially swap out machine learning for water quality components. So in a metabolism model, we have gas exchange, primary production, respiration, and diffusive transport. And he'll be comparing an all process-based model with an all machine learning model and with various combinations where machine learning is swapped out for the different processes. That's yet to be determined. And our final example here is foundation model that we're working on right now, and we just have preliminary results. The lead on this is Abhilash Nayag, who's a postdoc with Anuj Karpatni at Virginia Tech. And this takes dozens of well-studied lakes, fine-tunes pre-trained models based on those lakes and applies it to out-of-sample lakes, ideally thousands of lakes across the lake. We're in some of the early stages of this process. I only have two slides here. This is a very complicated slide, and it's that way on purpose. It's meant to point out that the way that computer scientists and AI approach a problem is really different than what we do in traditional process-based modeling. There are several steps involved here, and we don't have time to go through these steps here today. But suffice it to say that the representation of the data needs to be transformed so that it can be what we call tokenized. It can be broken up into bits and pieces that can then be put into an embedded framework where the system learns the relationships between the variables and can discover all kinds of hidden relationships among the variables. So the variable with itself and the variable with the inputs and the outputs and the internal states of the system. That goes through an encoding and a decoding process that's a complex process that generates some very interesting outputs for the system. And let's just go to that set of initial predictions. These are a comparison of different models. The one we're generating, which is Lake FM for Lake Foundation model, and their mean squared error. The rest of these models are foundation models for generic time series modeling. And Lake FM, which is designed specifically for lakes, of course, outperforms the other foundation models. This is just on a test set. We have yet to go much more broad than that. So I'm wrapping up here now with just a few slides to talk about the lessons that we've learned. And what I'm hoping, at least for for you all who are interested in the water quality as it pertains to harmful algal blooms and phytoplankton community dynamics, including cyanobacteria specifically, is that some of these ideas may inspire research you may be interested in pursuing. So methodological lessons we've learned is that knowledge constraints improve both the prediction and the interpretation of the data. Embedding the physics, it stabilizes the model, it prevents overlearning, and yields some interesting ecological insights, what we're working on. Data scarcity is less limiting than expected. These models are designed to be multimodal, so they can use data from different sources, data from different types of data, ultimately from remote sensing to manual data to sensor network data. I didn't cover that today, but there's research in those areas because the need for sure. And hybrid models reveal where models fail too. And so we can interrogate our assumptions of the process-based models within this framework and see what works well and what doesn't work well, and what the data tell us that may be different. And model uncertainty becomes more interpretable as well. Similarly to how hybrid models reveal where models fail, the model knowledge-infused architecture clarifies whether the uncertainty is more about the data limits or the model structure that's in the system. And then there are a few conceptual lessons from KGML too. In modeling, we have this tradition that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And that drives us toward parsimony in model development, which has been a long tradition that I've adhered to and has worked very well for the kinds of questions that we're asking. But in a very model-rich and data-rich environment where we have the opportunity to discover mechanism that may be latent in the data and represented in there, especially in big populations of the data, we may want to embrace model complexity in these cases. Systems are more interconnected than our models imply. Transfer learning makes that really evident. What we learn from a diverse set of lakes that cover broad gradients are really important for a target system that we're interested, or out of sample data. Our assumptions about mechanism need to be evaluated on a regular basis. Again, with complex systems, even though we're quite confident in the mechanisms, how they're expressed at the ecosystem scale can be really different than our assumption about how it works at the micro scale. Framing a problem as learn, simulate, and diagnose loops can be really helpful. So going through the modeling process in an iterative way can give us lots of insights into the nature of the models and the nature of the data. And knowledge can act as an organizing principle for data. So just instead of applying a machine learning uh, approach without the inclusion of data, using our expertise and our experience and knowledge, both implicitly and explicitly, gives us great strategies for attacking those data. So that wraps it up. I hope it at least gave you a little bit of insight into knowledge-guided machine learning and how it might be applicable to harmful algal bloom prediction and understanding. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to field those. Or if you want to reach out to me after this, I'd be happy to entertain emails or other forms of connection. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. That was great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that they have your email address as well. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure that your model development has made it this far yet, but
Right.
so we'll see. But so in terms of adapting the model between lake ecosystems, would you say, or do you have any data on whether it's the hydrology that drives this, the adaptability of the models, or is it the biological community? Is it the shape of the lakes, or what would you say is the biggest driver of the applicability between the models?
Yeah, I love this question. And I don't have a solid answer for you yet, but I'm going to couch it a little bit differently. And I ask this of my colleagues all the time. How much do you need to know as an expert who studies lakes? How much do you need to know about a lake that you haven't studied before you can make a pretty good prediction? And
Hmm.
most people come back and they say, well, I'd want to know where in the world is it? Where's the latitude? What is its hydrologic setting and its hydrology? Is it a seepage lake? Is it a drainage lake? How big is it? That says something about the hydrologic residence time. And is it situated in a city or in a forest or in an ag environment? Um, and once you answer those questions, they've got a pretty decent idea. And then they'll say, okay, just give me a few pieces of data. I need just one phosphorus measurement and maybe one temperature profile in the summer and one oxygen profile in the summer. Now I can tell you a lot about the dynamics of that system. And what we're really keen to explore in the foundation model world is, do we get a similar answer when we interrogate the foundation model? In other words, we take what we've trained up and apply it to a new lake and we start adding information. So, where's the lake located? How big is the lake? What's its hydrologic residence time? What's one or two phosphorus measurements? And how much better do the predictions get as we start adding information in that case? And we don't know the answer, but I think it's going to be super interesting to find out. I do want to add the caveat that I think once it gets to harmful algal blooms, all bets are off. We're in a new realm when it comes to HABs, which is super challenging, but also super exciting.
Hmm. Hmm. So in terms of that, then you haven't pinned down whether it's light, nutrient loading, temperature, or what is really the main driver of these have
Yeah.
blooms or anything. Have you?
Yep. I think you can think about it in terms of nested, probably space and time scales. I tend to think about it in nested time scales myself, but at the broad scale, we know it's nutrient loads. And
Hmm.
if you have enough nutrients in the water column, you're going to have harmful algal blooms. Now, there has been a lot of research lately on cyanobacteria populations in oligotrophic systems and the potential for producing toxins in those scenarios. So I don't want to discount that, but when I think harmful algal blooms, I think of the noxious,
Hmm.
smelly, scummy, green looking lakes.
Mhm.
Um, and for any one particular summer, there's pretty good information that tells us that the antecedent conditions, in our case, in temperate dimectic systems, what happened in the spring is pretty important, mostly
Mhm.
because it has to do with the available phosphorus that's in the water column. It still doesn't tell us when those blooms are going to occur and how bad necessarily those blooms are going to be. It just kind of tells us what's the probability of seeing some blooms. Now, you want to get
Mhm.
down to the timing of blooms and the
Yep.
magnitude of blooms. Now we're into the really hard and interesting things. My gut feeling, and I don't know this, is that we don't have the right data because there are lots of important processes that we just don't have good information on. For example, um, undoubtedly, viruses play a role in the wax and wane of populations. And so, trying to understand the microbial dynamics that go way beneath cyanobacteria is probably important. There are probably community level dynamics that are happening, the aggregation of populations that form, sort of colonies or big blobs, that affect the feedback to the chemistry and the biology and the physics of the system are probably important as well. And then all kinds of things that have to do with the cyanobacteria and how they metabolize phosphorus, how they interact with each other, and how they respond to, for example, UV radiation and available light are pretty complex. And so my worry is that there's complexity that is sort of beyond our current modeling capability that
Mhm.
results in what are emergent behaviors that appear stochastic just because we simply don't have the data at the right time scale to be able to predict them. So I think we're kind of stuck there with the kind of data that we have, the kind of models that we have. It's going to be a challenge. And so my
Mhm.
call to the community is how can we bring together data, even if it's from a bunch of different lakes, sampled in a bunch of different ways, to be able to begin down this path of new kinds of models to address those problems?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really interesting thought project,
Yeah.
because each of these have their own microbial community that are all evolving differently. And yeah,
Yep.
that's really fascinating. So,
Yep. Mhm.
um, okay. Well, with that, that was all my questions. You touched on everything. So, thank you again for your time. And if anybody viewing this ends up with extra questions, feel free to reach out to Paul. And we'll see you hopefully at the symposium on January 8th and 9th. We're looking forward to it. So thanks again, Paul.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.